Good morning, everyone. We're still going to wait a couple of more minutes. A huge shout out goes to my colleague, our colleague, Natasha Vautour, who just wrapped up the Francophone, the French version of this lovely coffee and conversation. I'm trying to put on my morning radio DJ announcer voice. Natasha, cela, c'était une conversation tellement inspirante.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, eh?
It was.
A lot of reflections.
Good morning to Alicia Collins. Alicia is the newest member here to Brilliant Labs. Alicia is our creative catalyst. And the three of us have been talking with our team about the design thinking process, or what we like to call it, the process by which you make brilliant things. We've been talking for hours and hours, and we're excited to share our thoughts and hear your thoughts as we begin this coffee and conversation. A few notes here just before we begin. You've all received some troubleshooting tips and tricks that we've discovered since yesterday. If you want to check your email, essentially they can be summarized by turn it off and on again. No, if you're having some audio or video issues, just try refreshing your browser. It will ask you to do that audio test again. A reminder that this platform, there's our old colleague, KO. Old as in your age, not old colleague. You're still our colleague. Refresh your browser if you're having any technical issues. Welcome to our Coffee and Conversations Day 2, hosted on our very own Brilliant Labs meeting platform, designed, made by our in-house web developer maker, Josiah. If you have any technical issues, you can private message Josiah just by clicking on his name over on the left underneath users, of which we now have 86, and we have 18 watching on our YouTube live stream. All right, I'm going to take a sip of coffee and catch my breath here.
I just wanted to mention that for the links and things that we are sharing, you can also refer to shared notes if you're referring to a document, so you can find the links there.
So the one you put there, Alicia, is the one that explains the design thinking process and the different steps, yeah?
We'll just put some background music on for another moment while I find our handout for today. All of this information has been curated in one lovely spot. You can find it by navigating your favorite browser. For this platform, we do encourage you to use Chrome or Firefox. But we have all this information on our website at brilliantlabs.ca/June Learning. Maybe one of my colleagues can put it in there in the public chat while I find our handout for today. Okay, well, a huge good morning to all of our participants. We are astounded by the enthusiastic participation that we've received and the interest that we've received for today in particular. We watched the users climb to 111 and 23 watching on our YouTube live stream. Before we get any further, this is a conversation, and so please, we would love to see more webcams than just the three of us. By inviting you to turn on your webcam. We're not sure what kind of pressure that'll put onto our stream, but as we are true makers, what's the worst that can happen? Let's see what our Brilliant Labs meeting platform can handle, because this is meant to be a collaborative conversation as we discuss a process by making brilliant things. Morning, Peter. Thanks for turning on your webcam. If you would like to say something, you can give us a wave. By turning on your webcam, that's also a good indication that you would like to share your audio. No pressure there, Peter. But down in the bottom of your screen there, if you want to click on your microphone at any point through the conversation, you can just click there and unmute yourself and feel free to cut us off. And all of us who are colleagues and we work on the Brilliant Labs team, we are champions at cutting each other off, right?
That we are.
That we are. All right, well, let's get into it. Today's our second day of Coffee and Conversation. And today it's all about something that is not new to education or pedagogy or really the corporate world. The process by which you make brilliant things, otherwise known as the design process, is not our own. I think it is owned by a collective of designers. Anyone who has this motivation to take raw materials and combine them into something new, combine them with their motivation to create, whether that is for a company, for the corporate world, our decision makers at the Department of Education, I am sure are using some design-oriented decisions in crafting what we heard on Friday. And so today we're going to explain or try to dig into our decisions that we have made to expand upon the Stanford model of design thinking for educators. And Natasha prepared this lovely handout, and it's all centered around, first off, coffee. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and take my colleague Natasha's lead as she posed this question to our French colleagues just an hour ago. How many of you have made coffee this morning? And that's a rhetorical question, or at least I can only see a few of you there. Anyone want to, Peter, there you go. Peter, if I'm putting you on the spot, like I often do you want to share the process by which you made your coffee this morning?
Yeah, I opened my bag of coffee pods. Shame on me to use those instead of
no judgment here.
Go to grounds, and walked over to a staff room. And this is my morning routine when I come in. Open the coffee maker, put my mug under the or on the stand, I guess you call it. Put the coffee pot in. Close the lid, looked to see, and it said, oh, needs more water. So I went and got water, poured the water in, pressed the button, coffee came out, and then it came back to work. But it's about the same thing every morning.
Perfect. I'm really excited that you highlighted the routine nature of your coffee making. Anyone else want to share their process that they have that warm mug of coffee in their hand? Natasha, how did you make your coffee this morning?
I make my nice espresso. I love coffee. I'm an avid coffee, and I love to play around with my coffee. It's something I've made differently in the past 2-3 months. It's a new thing. I never used to do that. I make my coffee, always needs something that makes it sugary. So either a little vanilla, a little cream with French vanilla, even vanilla syrup, maple syrup, cinnamon, anything that will add that little extra taste to my espresso or latte every morning. I play around with it.
Awesome.
Can I say something? Peter said something to me that really reflected to the brilliant process for making brilliant things. When he said, shame on me for using pods, to me it was something that you were very judgmental of yourself, Mr. Peter, I find. But it also made me reflect on the empathy part of it. The reason we see different things and we make our coffee in different ways really empathizes to our routine and what we do and the time we have and what we prioritize and what we want to make with our coffee and how our life is. So it's really part of that empathy of how do you feel about your coffee and how I feel about my coffee. And I don't think it's somewhere we should be shameful at this point. It's really respecting the different parts of coffee making.
Yeah, but coffee is so good for the garden, coffee grams. So that's why I'm sort of saying shame on me, because I could take them home and put them in my garden and grow maybe better vegetables.
You may want to save that example if we get to the point that we think we're going to share an example of design thinking. You know, on the handout there, we like to collect, so every day there's going to be something that plays with the theme, something for you to reflect on. And Peter, you mentioned how your coffee and my own, I'll use myself as an example, it's very routine. We have a 2-year-old daughter at home now, and for the past well, really 3 years, coffee is an essential requirement of our household, and it has become so routine. You get up, you put the coffee on, and you drink at least, well, in my case, 3 cups before our morning video conferences. So we like this analogy of making coffee as we think about how we plan for our lessons, how we planned for our lessons in the past, how we design our lessons now, how we will design our lessons in the future, and the routine that is involved in that process. And do we permit ourselves to take pause and think about the design considerations as educators, as we prepared, are preparing, or will prepare for our lessons? And so there's a few notes there in the handouts where, I mean, this is apparently a big thing. Maybe not in Fredericton or New Brunswick, but putting butter in your coffee apparently is going to be the next biggest thing that you're driving through Starbucks or insert, you know, your preferred coffee establishment. Maybe Tim's won't adopt the buttered coffee tradition. But it's something to adjust your routine just a little bit. Maybe you want to heat your mug with some boiling water before you add your coffee in it in the morning, so that you explore the thermal capacity of the mug that you are using, and it keeps that morning routine coffee just a little bit warmer. We really love thinking about the analogies, the connections, the entanglements between whatever routine practice that we have and our instruction and how we learn as a professional, as an educator. And there's going to be a lot of play and a lot of prescription, 2 Ps, that are wrapped around our routines now and in the future. And we've been reliant on the design thinking process here within our organization. And as we plan our lessons in our activities, our Maker Fun activities in response to the COVID-19, and we've learned to really take comfort in using this process to provide a little bit of a structure in a very open, free-forming activity. So, I guess a question for all of you: what type of design, what type of thoughts are rolling around in your heads about the design process, or how you may even plan your lessons as we consider September 2020? We see some comments coming on. Materials available, physical space, the end goal first. Portable packages that require minimal technology. Yes, starting point.
The starting point when we think about design, and I think with the design process, one of the big starting points is that call to make. If you notice, we added that part. If you've seen different other design thinking process, we added the call to make because it does. The best design does start with mostly with the problem where you need. Why are you making something? So what is that call to make? What problem do you want to solve? I look back at what happened here during the pandemic where we got a new little puppy and she couldn't get on the couch, and my son made a little ramp for her to get on the couch. So what was his call to make was to solve a problem. So as we reflect on our new pedagogies and how we're going to use this problem solving in our classes, how can we integrate this call to make and in this design thinking process?
Yeah, so a little bit more context on why we added that into the design thinking process. You know, as we've been traveling throughout schools and working with students and teachers in the dozens and hundreds for the last 5 years, we've seen this overwhelming sensation of this motivation to create, this motivation to make. And as educators, you know, we see that from teachers that we work with as well. What is that? How can we take a moment to think about the reason why we have decided to brush the dust off of the materials, to choose the raw materials that we have around us, and we rise to that occasion to create, to grab those raw materials and put them together to create something new. And what we are creating, what we are constructing, can be those lessons as well. So what kind of raw materials are we going to have at our disposal to combine? And what is, as we look at that call to make, and then the next hexagon, empathy, can we really explore our call to make in conjunction with our empathy in the design process? How are we being empathetic to ourselves, to our students, to the classroom materials, to the community in which we are creating this experience? So to drive the conversation forwards, I thought we could reflect on a lesson topic, a sample activity that we often use, and that is a community garden. So what if we are going, as educators, we are going to apply the process by which we make brilliant things, the design thinking process, to a community garden in our classroom in September 2020. Thinking about that same type of lesson that we would have offered last year, that we may have offered last month, and what that lesson may look like in September 2020. How are we going to design to lead our students through the creation of a community garden?
How much space do you have?
I think that's the question that you need to consider based on the context and what you envision. Is it going to be a space in like a physical space, or can it be community garden at different place? Can people grow something at their home and that can be part of something more collective? Or is it something outside where people are involving others? So I guess it's pretty open, depends on the context that you're exploring.
So how much space do we have? I like it because as an organization, you know, that supports maker-based education, we want to get our students out there combining raw materials and building those planter beds and excavating the space, or maybe even building that little window box planter. And there was one great maker fun activity that we posted as an organization over the pandemic offerings, where you took leftover vegetables and you harvested the seeds and you planted them, and it was a really beautiful activity that created quite a few windowsill gardens. You know, even before, as we were asking those same questions, what's in our community garden? Even if we were making a virtual community garden, if we're presenting this to our students, what does it mean to be empathetic to your end audience? If we are designing an experience for our community, do our students actually know the community in which they live? Do they know their own nutritional needs? And these types of questions may sound strange, coming from an organization like Brilliant Labs, who have been known to use a range of materials, including really high-tech materials to build community gardens. But in this moment, maybe there's more of an opportunity to engage in this empathetic problem solving of what kinds of vegetables will our community want to see in our community garden. Can we engage our students first in the design thinking process by exploring the empathetic reasons of why they want to build a community garden, or why, as educators, we are designing this experience for our students?
There's a lot of questions about how do we get buy-in from the students, and it makes me reflect that when we talk about the design thinking process, or the brilliant process of making brilliant things, we really want to make the call to make is what is important. So how are you, as a pedagogue or as a teacher, going to guide your students that they will understand and empathize and want to make something? What will be their call to make? We often create these projects, and we do, and that's super fine. We build this whole project and we plan the project from A to Z for the students to work on the project. But what's the reflection before that will engage our students within the project? So that call to make is very important. And as a teacher, the role there is to get them to get their own ideas. And it'll probably be different than yours, and that's okay. As long as in the process, when you're making the garden and where you're making it, that's where they will find their way within the project. And when they do get to have that empathy and understand the need for a community garden, why do we need that? That's where we'll change their perceptions. And when their perceptions change, that's when they'll get engaged, because they'll see the difference of, okay, what can a community do in my community? A community garden, what kind of difference can it have in my community? What can I do to be helpful? And I think that's where the process, the brilliant process, is important, to bring that in the class, getting that call to make. And we as pedagogues sometimes not build up the call to make, but we try to alleviate every obstacle to make sure that they do make the same thing that we want them to make. So sometimes as a pedagogue, we have to use that creativity and really let the kids get their own call to make from what we've showed them or managed with them.
Yeah, it makes me think of the role of contrivance. And as educators, you're saying, Natasha, that you're creating this instance in which students can have the opportunity to explore a problem or a situation, whether it's creating a community garden or something else. And so as we were exploring the use of creativity in our lesson planning, at what point do we feel that the problem that we are posing to the students is too contrived? But I often hear, from students and teachers, well, I don't have an idea. I don't know where to start. And that's completely understandable. And what's great about really exploring these open questions is that we need to find comfort in how big of a problem that we're posing to our students. And even if we say, hey, let's make a community garden, there are a number of different entry points that students can explore, and none of those entry points should be left unexplored. And so I just saw one of the comments, Peter said, I really like the idea of building a hydroponic garden. Well, I think that's really neat. Well, what other types of gardening have your students explored to get to that point where they have defined, all right, I am going to set out and build a hydroponic garden. Who's going to take care of that garden? And what types of collaboration or communication have you established in your own community, within your schools, between your students, of who's going to take care of that garden? Do you have your language arts teachers and your social studies teachers and everyone on board to create this interdisciplinary approach to really explore the learning opportunities of even creating that schedule of, is it called husbandry for caring for a garden? Statistics involved in probability, what type of schedule are we going to create, and who has the skill sets? So even, it may seem like it's a contrived activity. There are so many opportunities in which your students can enter into this problem and share in that experience together.
I think sometimes it's also important to think about the relevance for the students. I guess we can start with these bigger ideas or problems as big, but sometimes we can also start with like just a small element of like how students associate with a theme or like a problem, as you're saying. So community garden, like how does a garden like is for self and how I can contribute to the community, and then assessing what are the needs and figuring out all these systems involved in it. Like, is it about the budget? Is it about the material? Is it about the space? But I guess looking at like this empathy element that Natasha was mentioning about, it resonates a lot with me. Empathy for self and empathy for others. And that's where you are able to connect. And as teachers, we do this process several times. Connecting with the students require empathy. Students connecting with ideas require empathy at another level. So I guess these, even though the process is defined as like different steps, but I think they're kind of integrated and comes out beautifully. And that's what makes any project possible and brings out all those nuances in the process.
And maybe in all that process, the students will see that, no, we don't need a garden in our community. We already have some. We already have all these resources in our community. So it brings back to that call to make, and what do we need and what problems do we want to solve? I love to start my language arts class at the beginning of the year, because I was always project-based learning for the past 5 years. And when I would always ask the students, what are the problems that we have in our community? What's missing? What's missing? Or what problems do we have? What is it that you don't like? What do you like? So we would just take a whole 1 period or 2 and write those ideas down. And then we say, okay, where do we have control over and what can we help? So just there, by creating coming from the students, what are the problems they want to solve? It was incredible what they got to create, but that was then that they had that call to make, that together as a group, we would find these ideas that would bring everybody together as a class. So we made a welcoming thing, a bag. One year we had a new student, and she said, oh, well, I find it difficult because when I get to school, I didn't know who was in charge of the student council. I don't know like the map of this school. I had nothing. What are the school colors? All those things. So we created a welcome bag to our school. And then we created that same welcome bag for our new kindergarten students. And then they created activities for families at night. And then they wanted more arts in our community, so they created paint nights. But they were all getting that call to make from those problems. So I think that's where this process really generates real ideas through different lenses. So we do, as adults, sometimes have that lens of, oh, I think in our community there, we need a garden, but what are the kids' lenses and what the students are? And maybe they will come up with that same idea you had, and that's okay. And then maybe they won't. So how can you as a pedagogue then accompany the students and ensure they do get all these learnings coming out of the curriculum that you're supposed to do through these projects?
Melanie, I think did you have something to add?
Well, I think that sometimes we get too stuck on what the final project that goes with the outcome, but instead of having the process go with the outcome. So let's say you're doing language arts, science, or social study. It might be more of the writing, the talking about their ideas, or being able to express themselves, or able to do the research to back up their fact. Or so it's not the end project that is evaluated. You could have like different end project. The end project could have nothing to do with your subject, but the rest had to do with it. And I think sometimes you're stuck with the end project having to fit a curriculum outcome.
You got it. And we see this so frequently in the projects that we support. These projects are super big, you know, even to build, playing off that community garden idea, that is a huge project that may not ever get done. But that doesn't mean that the process is any less valuable or replete with opportunities in which we can learn. Speaking of opportunities, I feel that this pandemic, while devastating, has brought new instances of opportunities where we're going to see more reliance on interdisciplinarity and cross-curricular instruction, and being very fluid in the way as teachers that we identify the curriculum or the curricula that go along with our projects, or the process by which we are creating these projects before we ever see any product at the end. I feel like I'm being a little dramatic with my hand motions.
And I think it brings in again to that process and what can we learn through the process. I love what Melanie said. It is important to bring that the end result sometimes will not work. But we have to reflect on, what did the kids learn? What did they learn when they were making it? What did they learn through the process? Did they build resilience? Did they get creative? Were they using critical thinking? How did they define their project? Where were the difficulties that they had? And then what happens after they fail? How do you pick them back up, and what can you do and help them redesign after this failure of, okay, to them, they wanted this one product. The other day I made bread and I forgot my yeast wasn't good. I used all my good things, but then at the end my bread wasn't good. What did I do after? How did I react? What did I change for my next bread making? It's getting those students to create and build that resilience through this process for making things, and then accompanying them and making sure that helping them learn and define their problems better.
Thanks for sharing that, Natasha. I want to add an example that I've noticed in one of my sessions with 6th graders, and we were working on a collective project, a dome for everybody, like a geometric one. And as we started working on the process, initially we thought it would be better if children can share their vision through sketches, and we did that, kind of like call for proposals. And it was great. Children had great ideas, but what ended up happening was they started getting a little bit competitive about, like, my design is better than the others. And that gave us an opportunity to talk about collaboration. And we shifted that narrative a little bit. Rather than saying, well, what do we create? We said, like, okay, so we are creating something. How can we decide on what elements to choose from all these different projects? So we kind of changed the whole kind of call for action. So rather than creating one big project, it became about, so we have all these designs, and let's think about what are the elements that you appreciate from each of them. And the children associated with this other challenge about, how do we make sure that everybody's ideas, some element from everybody's ideas, get reflected in the final project. So that was a way the process led us to practice collaboration. When children reflected on that process, that's when something that they valued, like, I didn't know this other student was good at these things. I didn't know, like, we have so many skills in this class. And they also noticed it was a challenge to make sure everybody's ideas were included. These other things, what I call designerly ways of being, collaboration, problem finding, process is really the key. The teacher's role become to identify what's happening, respond to that situation, and it's okay to change the whole narrative in between if you feel like.
You know what I love about that, Alicia? I can see these hexagons breaking apart from formation and recombining to suit what your students, the culture of your learning environment at that very moment. And while this very nice descending cascade of hexagons in the design thinking can provide us structure, it is the least prescriptive model for instruction that there is. And so as your students are really exploring how they identify with one particular model or iteration, they may not have moved out of that call to make. They are still exploring why they have brought themselves to these materials, to this overwhelming urge to create something to share. Within that call to make, and as they're exploring their empathetic reasons for which they are making, they are prototyping, they're ideating. And we've been very playful in while we've been designing these activities, and some of you have seen these before. We have these hexagons. This is a moment to really throw out the playbook of lesson planning and to really play with the process by which we create our lessons, by which our students are experiencing these lessons, and to move these hexagons around on a daily basis or hourly basis, and to be comfortable in that moving. And it's likely going to be your students, whether they are remote. They're definitely not virtual, because even if they are remote, they're still students, so they're not virtual students. But anyway, no matter where your learning environment is, there are going to be so many ideas that are driven by your students. And we have to explore all of them.
I also liked when Alicia mentioned the reflection part. We look at reflection as you have to look at reflection as a learning aspect. You have to look at reflection that what can you learn through reflection? And we spoke a lot about it this morning in the Francophone session. And what does a student that is reflecting look like? What do you teachers, how are you reflecting about in your practice? And that's one thing that this pandemic right now is giving us a certain time. If you're not too timed with your sessions, there's time to reflect on our pedagogy and how we make and how we teach. There's time to reflect on what's important in our schools, and also how can my students reflect together? How can we reflect as a class? And how can I bring that? It's an important part of learning. Like we often, me, Alicia, and Jacob sit through half-hour or hour sessions of just us reflecting together on what we want to offer as these, like what we wanted to offer as these sessions. But do we take time to do that in our classrooms? And how will that take a different role when we walk in schools in September with our students? Will we give them time to reflect? What does it look like?
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
I think that the reflecting process also, first, I guess, hi, everybody. The biggest part about reflecting too, we talked about the process. And to me, one of the things that I like to do in my classroom is have the students journal as they go through the making process. I think you're all able to, at the end of that process or throughout the process, able to reflect on everything and not necessarily that end result, right? We talked about how that end result isn't actually the the goal of all of this and what we can kind of take away from it all. It's the process, and journaling actually helps the students reflect on that entire process as opposed to just reflecting on what we have at the end of that process, right?
And for most of the designers, I should mention that I'm trained as both a designer and a teacher. And when I started working, I've noticed when this whole design thinking was used, as Kyo mentioned about reflecting on action, means something has happened, you've created this product, and then at the end, you build in this element where you're giving an opportunity for students to share about the overall process. But what you mentioned is like this reflect in action is so significant, because in that process through reflection, it gives an opportunity for students to reflect, but also to refine the process as they're going. And as Natasha mentioned, like ask why, like in this every element, like why we are doing this and what kind of factors in the whole process has changed, is shift. Because design or any project is not static. It's not something that there's a problem and this is what we have to figure out an ideal solution. There's a lot of iterations involved in the process. And this reflecting in action, I guess journaling is a great way for teachers to also know what's happening or what the students are thinking with. We often associated like assessing the students by like what they create as a final outcome. But I guess if we just shift that and on just focusing on the thinking process of children and how we can respond to what's happening with them, I guess so reflection not only helps the students, but it also helps teachers to make the overall experience really better. And I guess it works both ways.
It provides such a great window to explore your students' socio-emotional learning. We would have to be incredibly naive to think that our SEL aspect of our students is going to remain the same as we think about September 2020. And so being very mindful of the information that these students may provide during the reflection and action, and how that is a window into their socio-emotional learning and the opportunities that may come from that for creative collaboration, for you as a teacher to exert yourself and to share your passions for a similar subject area, a similar point of view, or to be compassionate about where they are in their maker journey or as a student.
I like the idea of the journaling through the process, but I also like the idea, one teacher brought it up this morning too, of reflecting together. We often, as teachers, I know I used to do it all the time, get the students to sit and reflect by themselves, and they would have to have an action linked to that reflection. But oftentimes when we reflect, and it looks different for everybody. So a kid that doesn't like to write too much or draw too much or just likes to talk, how can he reflect with somebody else? And it's important also to reflect with peers and bounce those ideas. As we look when we're teachers and we like to collaborate with others to plan something, and we get other ideas and we build on each other. So I think that adding those open discussions on top of all that we do in class and having these open reflections will bring a lot of this creative thinking out.
And thinking about coffee as a ritual, that can be, the reflection circles can be part of your ritual. That's something that you do with students every day. And you build these moments integrated within the process.
Oh, I see someone new turning on their webcam.
Hi.
Hi, Rhonda.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yourself?
Good, good, good. I thought maybe I'd share. I teach grade 1. I've been doing grade 1 for a few years now, and I am very much into project-based learning. And just, you know, the idea of reflection. I find that in grade 1, we are continually talking, and doing and talking and doing and talking and doing. And it's a continual ongoing process. So when we reflect on what we've done, that's what spurs us on to another investigation. So like, for instance, you know, we are reading about sinking and floating and talking about sinking and floating, and we decide that the kids decide they want to try making a boat, and everybody gets a little piece of paper and they make a boat, and we test it to see how well it floats. Some of them float, some of them don't. So we sit and we discuss it, and we share our ideas about how maybe if it had sides on the boat, that would keep the water from coming in, blah, 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 that sort of thing. And so that spurs us on to wondering what would happen if we redesigned our boat and we made bigger sides on it. After that, we would talk again, and that would spur us on to, like, for example, would another material make a better boat? Like, would tinfoil make a better boat than paper? And so the children decide they want to test that. Then from there, we share our results, and we go on with, well, whose boat is going to hold, or is going to be the strongest? So we decide that we're going to try to hold little rocks in it and see who has the most. And of course, we're using all kinds of our curriculum within all of this experimentation, from learning how to count to 20 to everything else. But I find that the reflection can continue to spur us on into wanting to design things. We can share our designs and learn from each other, collaborate into improving our designs of whatever it is that we're creating. But I find that the reflection and the discussion is continually what motivates the children to want to move on and to think more into this. Okay. Going on, aren't I?
No, Rhonda, thank you so much for sharing. I love the word spurring. Like, it really describes that generative motion of, you know, oh, this and then this and then this, and I can almost see you engaging with your grade ones. And there's something special about the wonderment that we see in elementary that I don't know why is there a perception of it as the grade goes on, you know, this sense of wonderment or, you know, willingness to share, ideation. You know, is there something about what the structure of school is doing? And maybe this is rhetorical because I'm leading you on to share, but I see that so much in elementary and less as the grades go on.
I don't know, just personally, having experimented with, like, I really believe that project-based learning or authentic learning is the way to go. The way to go, because children are engaged and it's led by them, then they're going to be, it's intrinsic. They're going to want to learn if they're really interested in it. But I think that, I don't know, this is probably not fair for me to say, but I think teachers are afraid that we're not covering the curriculum if we're not taking a curriculum outcome and then designing a lesson to meet that curriculum outcome. Whereas if you're going to let the students lead the way, then you have to trust in the fact that when they're learning authentically, they are going to be getting within that the curriculum outcomes that we need to cover. So I find a lot of times, even though I might realize that we're going to be doing a lot of measurement and math within experimenting with boats and which one is the strongest and whatever, I might find that during the happenings, we are working on another curriculum outcome. So I tend to look at the outcomes at the end of the day, what have I covered today, rather than saying, these are the outcomes that I'm going to plan for, and that's what I'm going to do tomorrow. It's, you know, does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much. It makes me think, and Natasha knows exactly where I'm going because she said it just an hour ago. It makes me think of that old adage of guide on the side, sage on the stage, you know, and positioning the teacher in the classroom. And, you know, sometimes we hear, conversations of student-led teaching and authentic learning and experiential learning and making. And these conversations almost devalue the role of a teacher. You know, there's no larger need for a teacher than in student-led design considerations and conversations. You know, it's so important. You're designing. You're the architect of that experience of where those questions go and how the students interact. So no, thank you very much for sharing. Jacqueline, were you giving a wave?
I wanted to respond to that. I like, Jacob, that you shared that teachers are more like an architect creating this experience. And to respond to what Rhonda mentioned, thank you for sharing. And I noticed Jacqueline has a comment about children might get off topic when you are exploring a particular topic. And thinking in the designer language, we call this thing like semantic thinking. So semantic thinking is about when you witness something that's completely different than an idea that you're exploring, you try to merge the two and try to bring in that element. So a pen and coffee, can they connect together? Let's figure out and bring that to the conversation. And students' voices are so important. You may notice like sometimes they might just talk about random things, but this might be the only opportunity that they're getting to express themselves. So how as teacher, we also have to focus on the curriculum, but how can we think about not shutting the students' voices or valuing that, but have this kind of an approach like improv comedy artists have, like yes and. So you value those opinions even though they are not connected. And like an architect, figure out a way how to connect that and bring them into the inquiry that people are doing that collectively. So you're not saying like that idea doesn't belong here, but you're trying to also do this interesting experiment to kind of bring in that bizarre element and bring in something new, like an interesting twist, like the butter in your coffee, to the conversation that you're exploring with the student.
Alicia, maybe that's a course that we need to construct, teacher improv techniques or improv comedy show of teachers. I think that'd be great. Sometimes it may only be able to be offered in the later hours of the day when our real creative juices start to flow, when we're reflecting about our day. I think that's really neat. I am mindful of the time here. That's not something that I usually say because I love these conversations. So it is 11:20. These are meant to be short, just kind of encapsulated reflections of coffee and conversation. Alicia, Natasha, and I, and whoever else would like to share a few ideas. There's always a few people who would like to click on their microphone at the end of the session. We encourage you to do that. We're not going anywhere for a few moments. At 1 o'clock, our next live session begins, both on the Anglophone and Francophone side. So make sure if you're interested in receiving some more professional learning that you check out our website for more information there. No, sorry, you're not the only one hearing a thumping. I have to be more aware of my microphone.
And I wanted to add, on behalf of Jacob, Natasha, we would love to hear more from you even after this session. I guess we saw this session as just an opening conversation. So Natasha created these beautiful reflective documents. I'm adding the link. But let us know your thoughts, your creative ideas, even certain problems that you foresee or some idea. We would love to continue these conversations. You can share something on social media, on Twitter, let us know, and that way we can continue this inquiry further and explore this together.
There will be obstacles, but we can be creative in how we deal with these obstacles. We're exploring even, before the pandemic hit, this idea of using design thinking in planning our lessons. And what would a contemporary lesson plan, what if we threw out the whole lesson plan as we know it, as we learned during our BEd or our master's or any type of formal training in education, and what if we applied it, the design thinking process to the archaic model of a table of a lesson plan? And that's what you see there below. That's a product of, we explored the community garden, and really it's just a cover page of what your lesson plan may be. There are a number of schools that part of their school improvement plan or district improvement plan is to have documents that guide decision makers or anyone who's observing your class, just to provide a little bit of insight into your planning for that lesson. And so we asked ourselves, what if? We asked a group of teachers, what if, we could really play with the formatting of a lesson plan and feeling free to move these hexagons of a lesson plan around. Anyway, so this is a project that will never end for us. And we're excited to take the summer and really reflect on a number of different lessons that emerge from this conversation today, and play with that format of a lesson plan. Maybe this will be the structure of a very unstructured September 2020. Maybe. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Tomorrow at 10:30, we'll also have cup 3 of our coffee and conversation. Natasha, Alicia, and I will be back here, and we'll be discussing permission to play. A really great topic, and you can all bring your thoughts, your ideas about play. No need to register. You can just check out our website. Actually, we would love it if you register, and feel free to share the links around your building and with your colleagues. And we have many more events happening later on this week. As Alicia said, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll integrate your ideas into these sessions as they come up. Thank you all.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that over the chat, I noticed a lot of people were talking about mistakes or embracing failures. I guess tomorrow's Coffee and Conversation would talk more about that. So looking forward to discuss that further.
All right, well, I'm going to bring back the comfortable jazz coffee shop music. That doesn't mean that you can't continue to share. Unmute your microphone. And I'll be stopping the YouTube live. So any questions or statements from here on out will not be captured in the YouTube live. So you can feel free to speak freely. Thank you so much for those of you who have shared in this session. It is a coffee and conversation, and we welcome participation of any kind. And enjoy the music.
Hey,
Hi,
Jacob.
Peter. Hey.
You were talking about what happens to kids and why they have trouble reflecting and speaking about their feelings and stuff. I found in my robotics class, and I'm actually going to take this to a couple of other classes, where I have the students in groups making, they have to do a project, solve some